Tonight on Reporting Scotland, the country's largest health board says sorry to patients who face long waits at A&E departments over Christmas and New Year. Scotland's Chief Constable faces calls to appear before MSPs to answer questions about his special leave while he's investigated for gross misconduct. An uncertain future for Andy Murray as his ongoing hip injury forces him out of the Australian Open.
If there is a solution, then I've every confidence that Andy will find a way to come back from this, because he's so dedicated, he's so committed to his tennis, he's so passionate about it.
Also on the programme, Fizzing Mad. Fans of Scotland's other national drink stockpile Iron Brew before the recipe changes. And it's Child's Play, how nursery children are helping to combat loneliness at a Highland care home. Good evening. Scotland's largest health board has apologised to patients who've faced lengthy waits for treatment at its hospital accident and emergency departments over the festive period. NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde has had to cancel planned operations and use surgical beds for medical patients to cope with the high demand. Here's our health and social care correspondent, Shelley Joffrey.
Glasgow's flagship hospital, like A&E departments across Scotland, is working flat out. The Queen Elizabeth has created extra inpatient beds at Gartnavel Hospital to cope with demand. Today, 14 planned operations were cancelled. At least 6 health boards in Scotland have done the same. Greater Glasgow and Clyde, Fife, Lothian, Grampian, Lanarkshire and Dumfries and Galloway. The new Royal Infirmary there was operating at red status yesterday. Today that's been downgraded to amber, meaning there's now limited capacity for new admissions.
We have cancelled a small number of operations. It's significantly less than yesterday. Likewise in clinics, we're talking a handful of clinics and maybe 2 or 3 patients have had operations cancelled, so it's small numbers. But we will review that on a day-to-day basis, just depending on the influx of patients.
In England, all planned operations have been cancelled until the end of the month. There are no plans for that here.
The system is under pressure, but we don't believe that's a step that is required. What we do expect, though, is local boards to make that decision on a day-to-day and week-to-week basis in order to manage demand. What we are not seeing is the requirement to do that across the whole of Scotland.
But the Health Secretary has apologised to patients who waited longer than they should.
Oh, Shelley Joffrey joins me now. Shelley, why has demand been so high over the festive period? I mean, is it any more than it usually is over this time?
Well, we won't know for sure until the figures are actually published next week, but we do know there were 2 4-day weekends this year, and that's when GPs and pharmacies were shut, so that's certainly added to the pressure. Many people seem to have taken the advice, though, not to use A&E as their first port of call. NHS 24 dealt with almost 100,000 phone calls over that period. Flu cases are double what they were the same time last year, although they are still within seasonal norms, so that really doesn't explain the whole story. The Royal College of Emergency Medicine has described the last fortnight as being like a slow-motion major incident. Basically, demand for healthcare has far outstripped supply, and they say it's clear the system needs to work better.
Festive period's over now. How much longer will patients have to wait, for delayed operations and so on?
Well, individual health boards describe the situation as fluid. They're basically taking decisions, making judgments on a day-to-day basis. So it's hard to say at this stage how much longer it's going to go on for. But clearly, though, there are a lot of people who may have already waited quite a long time for planned operations who are going to face the frustration of even longer waits.
Shelley, thank you very much. MSPs have called Scotland's Chief Constable to give evidence on his continuing period of special leave while he's investigated for gross misconduct. Phil Gormley's been invited to Holyrood's Public Audit Committee later this month. It comes as it's been confirmed that an Assistant Chief Constable is now also under official investigation for gross misconduct. Our Home Affairs correspondent, Rival Alderson, reports.
Phil Gormley was granted special leave last September as investigations began into allegations of his gross misconduct. These haven't concluded, but it's now emerged the Scottish Police Authority wanted to bring him back to work 2 months ago, but that didn't happen. And MSPs now want to find out why. They've invited Mr Gormley and the current and former chairs of the SPA to speak to them.
If the SPA have decided unanimously to reinstate the Chief Constable, why is he not reinstated? We need to know why he's not at his job, sitting at home, doing nothing, costing the taxpayer £214,000 a year.
There have been claims Mr Gormley's return to work was blocked by ministers, but a senior government official told the committee that wasn't the case.
There have been discussions with government on these issues. The position of government is that in all of these considerations, it's important that the board considers the full range of circumstances.
Mr Gormley hasn't commented, but his lawyer issued a brief statement saying his client was constrained in what he can say to the media, given the circumstances he finds himself in while under investigation. His approach has been to maintain a dignified silence while he defends his position in relation to the allegations against him. In a separate development, it's been confirmed Assistant Chief Constable Bernie Higgins is now formally under investigation for allegations of gross misconduct. It's the latest stage in a process which saw him suspended from duty last month. Reval Alderson reporting Scotland.
One of the UK's leading hip specialists has told BBC Scotland that Andy Murray could be back for Wimbledon, even if he opts for surgery. The former world #1 has pulled out of the Australian Open and is now flying home to assess his options. He hasn't played a competitive match since July because of a persistent hip problem. Keridine Idsan reports. Sorry we don't have that report, but earlier I spoke to Colin Fleming, who's known Andy Murray since they were children and was his doubles partner in Britain's Davis Cup team. I asked him how big a decision it was for him to pull out of the Australian Open.
The way he limped into Brisbane at the weekend didn't bode well. He was due to warm up there for the Australian Open, but no one was surprised by the announcement, which was released early this morning. Sadly, I won't be playing in Melbourne this year as I'm not yet ready to compete, Murray said. I'll be flying home shortly to assess all the options, but I hope to be back playing soon. The past 6 months have largely been spent on rest and rehab as he tried to cure persistent hip pain. That plan hasn't worked.
I'm assuming that this is the end of his career, and it may not be. So, forgive me, but I've got a new hip, and it's just an awful long way back. It's a real uphill struggle from here.
We know he's very reluctant to have surgery because he's not convinced that surgery is going to solve the problem. He needs to make that call very soon, though. Otherwise, it's going to be an increasingly long time before we see him again on tour.
The double Wimbledon champion has never publicly revealed the exact nature of the problem, other than to say he's been managing a sore hip for much of his career. But the BBC has learned the problem includes a tear in the labrum, the rim of cartilage around Murray's right hip socket. He's now considering surgery and could still make Wimbledon if he does go under the knife.
Hopefully any wear and tear damage in the joint itself is only minimal. And I'm sure that Andy Murray's been seen by the very best surgeons and will have the best rehab team around him. And so I think that, yes, it is realistic that we'd hope to see Andy Murray back on the courts if a surgery is required within sort of 3 to 6 months, I'd hope. There are a good number of elite sportsmen who've had this surgery who've been able to return to a very good level of function.
That hope might help soothe a miserable few months for the former world #1. He limped his way to the Wimbledon quarter-finals last summer and hasn't played a competitive match since. He tried to get fit for Flushing Meadow, but pulled out of the US Open just before it started. He then had a charity hit with Roger Federer in Glasgow in November. He lost his fight to be fit for the Brisbane International, and then, much more significantly, for the season's first Grand Slam.
Ladies and gentlemen, Andy Murray.
5 times a losing finalist in Melbourne, Andy Murray won't even compete this time around. The question he's mulling over on the long flight home is whether the only way to save his career is with surgery. Keridine Idsan reporting Scotland, Glasgow.
And let's hear now from Andy Murray's old friend Colin Fleming on how big a decision he felt it was for him to pull out of the Australian Open.
Yeah, it's a massive decision and one that he's not taken lightly. There's no doubt about it. He's clearly done everything he can to be fit to play, and as he did at the US Open in September, he was there on site, hoping to be involved, and unfortunately it's just not worked out for him on this occasion. But you know, just fingers crossed he's able to be back on the court soon.
Now he has to consider hip surgery. How big a deal is that for a tennis player to have to consider surgery to your hip?
It's a very big deal. You know, it's a serious procedure to go through. A lot of players have struggled to come back from hip surgery in the past. Although, you know, procedures I'm sure have moved on a lot in recent years. And you know, to be honest, if there's anyone that's able to find a way back from something like this, it's Andy. You know, he's made a living, made a career out of finding a way in his tennis when he's out there and he's not necessarily feeling his best or playing his best. He still found a way to come through it and get the job done. And just really hopeful that he's able to do that again and find a solution to this hip injury he's got and get back on the courts as soon as possible.
Yeah, because there's been a lot of talk about this possibly, depending on how it goes, you know, ending his career, which must be agonising for him to hear and to be thinking about himself. But you're saying you'd back him to come back this time again?
Yeah, I think if there is a solution, then I've every confidence that Andy will find a way to come back from this, because he's so dedicated, he's so committed to his tennis, he's so passionate about it. You know, we saw that in his well, throughout his whole career, but his social media post earlier in the week was so sort of heartfelt and honest about how much this is hurting him and how much he wants to be back out there on the court. So, like I say, if there is a way, I'm confident Andy will find it and recover from this. And you know, I just hope so much that he's able to come back and this isn't the end of him. You know, he's been such a sporting icon for us, not just in tennis, but in all sports in Scotland and in Britain. And you know, if anyone deserves to finish their career on their own terms, whenever that might be, hopefully, you know, 4, 5, 6 years down the line, then it's Andy Murray. And I just, you know, really hope this isn't the end of him. And like I say, he comes back from this and is able to keep working towards his goals that he clearly still has in tennis.
Colin Fleming, thank you very much indeed. Police are hunting a hit-and-run driver after the death of a pensioner in Dundee. 67-year-old John Ogston was discovered with serious injuries on the city's Mains Road at around 11 p.m. on New Year's Day. Andrew Anderson has more.
John Ogston was out at a pub near his home here in Dundee's Hilltown area on the night of New Year's Day. He was making his way back to his house at around about 11 o'clock in the company of a female friend. Now, on Monday night, the streets around here were very icy, they were very slippy, and Mr. Ogston fell. He was helped to his feet by his female companion, who then left him to go and try and get help from his family. It would appear that at this point, Mr. Ogston has again fallen in the road and he's been struck or run over by a vehicle. The 67-year-old pensioner suffered serious injuries to his head and to his body, and he died later in hospital. Tonight, police made this appeal to the driver of the vehicle which struck him.
John has left 2 children who are absolutely devastated at his death. They require answers. My appeal to the driver is please come forward and do the right thing for this family. They need to know what's happened to their dad.
There's been a significant police investigation in the area since the accident on Monday night. Police say they're also anxious to trace 4 men who helped Mr. Ogston into his house after the accident. Now, the police are stressing that these men are not suspects, but that they might hold vital clues which will lead them to the driver of the vehicle which struck John Ogston.
A murder investigation is underway after the death of a man in the Tillydrone area of Aberdeen. Emergency services were called to a block of flats in Alexander Terrace at around 10 o'clock yesterday morning, where the body of the man was found. A woman has been detained in connection with the death. Police say it was a contained incident with no threat to the public. A man's body has been discovered following a fire at a property in Mill Path in Hawick. Fire crews were called to the scene shortly before 10 o'clock this morning. Police say the man's death is being treated as unexplained at this stage and that a report will be sent to the Procurator Fiscal. Scottish Labour say Tony Blair should attack the Conservatives instead of his own party, as the former Prime Minister called on Jeremy Corbyn to take a tough stance against Brexit. Mr. Blair also said another referendum should be held to decide if the Brexit deal is acceptable. Scottish Labour said that was not party policy, but in a new development, they say they could change their mind in the future. Here's our political correspondent, Andrew Kerr.
It's a big year in politics. The 12-month countdown to Brexit begins in March. The divisions in the Conservatives have been laid bare. Now it's Labour's turn.
The man who led the party for 13 years and led the country for 10 of those years, and he's with me. Good morning to you.
Good morning. The former Prime Minister, Tony Blair, has been touring studios today. He says the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, should shift position towards greater opposition to Brexit. And he's calling for a second referendum, this time on the Brexit deal.
You've got to carry on having the ability democratically to have a say until the moment you leave. I mean, because up to that point, you've got the right to compare what you will have with what you've got. And, you know, as I often say to people, it's like a house swap analogy, where you've agreed to swap the house, but you haven't seen the other house yet. When you see the other house, of course you've got the right to say, well, actually, frankly, I prefer to stay where I am.
Mr Blair is hoping to jolt Jeremy Corbyn into a new position, but the Labour leader has been cool on the EU, a position now shared by Scottish Labour under Richard Leonard's leadership. They say Tony Blair should attack the Tories instead and offer this on another vote.
The current position is that we don't want a second referendum, but you know, Brexit's a very movable feast. This is going to change depending on what's negotiated, depending on how this second stage of negotiations go. Then you know, I think nothing would be ruled out and nothing would be ruled in.
But in the future, you might change your minds.
Well, I think it's common sense to look at the negotiations, to watch what's going on in those negotiations, and then continually keep a view of what's happening, so that, you know, things may change.
The UK government doesn't want a second vote, so could Labour change their minds in 2018? That would be significant. Andrew Kerr, reporting Scotland.
You're watching BBC Reporting Scotland. It's 14 minutes to 7. A reminder of tonight's top story. The country's largest health board says sorry to patients who faced long waits at A&E over Christmas and New Year. And still to come is Child's Play, how nursery children are helping to combat loneliness at a Highland care home. UK Environment Secretary Michael Gove has outlined his plan to change completely the rules and regulations governing food and farming after Brexit. It'll be based on rewarding farmers who improve the environment rather than on simple land ownership. But it's not clear what that will mean for Scotland, where farming is devolved. Our Rural Affairs correspondent Kevin Keane reports.
Farmers have relied on subsidies for decades, but the system to administer them has long been regarded as broken. With Brexit, the industry is looking for an overhaul, and today came a vision of how it would look.
For anyone who was wondering what
Michael Gove, the UK Environment Secretary, said payments based on land ownership will eventually be replaced with a system primarily focused on the environment.
We'll design a scheme accessible to almost any landowner or manager who wishes to enhance the natural environment by planting woodland, providing new habitats for wildlife, increasing biodiversity, contributing to improved water quality, and returning cultivated land to wildflower meadows or other more natural states.
But Michael Gove's vision is somewhat less clear when it comes to Scotland, as there's no agreement on where repatriated powers will fall. There have been hints of a UK-wide framework, but it's all still up in the air.
Farming is a long-term process, and the stewardship of the countryside, including forestry, also a long-term activity, and farmers really need clarity sooner rather than later. Today's statement raises as many doubts as it answers questions.
As for the vision itself, that's being welcomed by farmers who recognise the need for change, but want further clarity.
Much of his time was actually representing England and representing DEFRA. What we're wanting now is more guarantees of what is being delivered to Scotland for Scotland to be able to deliver to suit what Scotland needs.
New forestry will be one big focus. Many groups have been campaigning for the environment to be front and centre of reforms.
What we would like to see is farmers or land stewards being rewarded for things other than just sheep production. So that could be flood prevention, it could be carbon sequestration, it could be biodiversity, all things like that. There's so much more that could be done with Scotland's landscape.
85% of Scotland's land like this is classed as less favoured, and additional subsidies make it profitable. That wasn't addressed today, and so many questions remain. Kevin Keane, reporting Scotland.
They call it Scotland's other national drink. Now, fans of Iron Brew are reportedly stockpiling it ahead of a change in the recipe, which will reduce its sugar content by almost half. The makers, AG Bar, are altering the formula before a government levy on sugary drinks comes into effect. The company say most people won't be able to taste the difference. Katie Hunter reports.
Up you come, just excuse a mess.
This is Operation Iron Brew.
This is my stash.
Ryan Allen from Ayr has bought 24 bottles ahead of the recipe change. He's keeping them in his loft, so he isn't tempted to drink them now. Back in his living room, Ryan has started a petition calling for AG Bar to scrap plans to reduce Iron Brew's sugar content by half.
Don't do it. Don't do it. You're not leaving us any option to get the original stuff. So it's part of our culture. It's Scottish national treasure. I just think we should be able to choose responsible adults.
Iron Brew says the vast majority of its drinkers want to consume less sugar. The company's confident most people won't taste the difference. The makers of Iron Brew say this will remain a sugary drink even after the changes. This can has 8.5 teaspoons of sugar in it. The new recipe will still have 4 teaspoons. Iron Brew drinkers in Ayr have mixed opinions.
The reason why I'm so fit is because I drink Iron Brew. It's my national drink. You've got to support Scotland.
What do you think about cutting sugar by half?
It's a great idea because, I mean, we've all got to stay fit.
Definitely for health, fizzy drinks, all fizzy drinks have too much sugar in them anyway, don't they?
Halving the sugar will just take away the magic, you know what I mean?
When do you like a drink of it?
Just every day. I mean, right now at home there's like a bottle on both sides of my bed.
Joking aside, many health experts would like other soft drink makers to follow.
I and many others have been urging reductions in the sugar content, and not just sugar but the sweetness content of these drinks for many years. And if one company does it, then to remain competitive, of course, we really want all the companies to do the same thing.
The new reduced sugar Iron Brew will begin rolling off the production line later in January. Katie Hunter, reporting Scotland.
Rangers have a new assistant manager, Jimmy Nichols, rejoining the club he played for in the 1980s. The 61-year-old is leaving Falkirk, where he was number 2 to Paul Hartley. The Ibrox club could also be about to sign winger Jamie Murphy from the English Premier League side Brighton. He's been having a medical in Glasgow. The 28-year-old's been playing in England since leaving Motherwell 5 years ago. Pensioners in a Highland care home are enjoying a play date with a difference. At Winnie Now Home in Nairn, nursery children have become sort of buddies of the residents in an intergenerational pilot scheme. Jackie O'Brien reports.
They may be generations apart in age, but these youngsters have given a new lease of life to residents at this Nairn nursing home.
Oh, delightful, aren't they? Absolute delightful, and talking away. She hasn't stopped talking. Have you, Bet? You're just a wee doll, would you? Just a wee dolly.
It's all thanks to a new initiative being piloted by the Church of Scotland Home and local nursery kids. The weekly visits have led to new friendships, which are boosting the well-being of residents.
People with dementia maybe forget things or repeat words. That goes, and it's just wonderful to see the difference. And even physical, we have people who will bend down and pick up balls, move chairs, things that they wouldn't physically do before.
Well, we do all sorts of things. We argue a wee bit sometimes. Apart from that, we do all sorts of things.
Twinkle, twinkle, Christmas.
Studies have already shown the benefits of intergenerational schemes like this, which are more common in America. And there's evidence that the interaction is important for children too.
The children will learn just that the old people aren't something to be feared. They're not just sat there away in a corner to be forgotten about. They're human beings like the rest of us. They love having a good laugh with the balloons, the songs, the actions. It gets them used to interacting with them and understanding about the wheelchairs and the Zimmers.
Parting company appears to be the most difficult bit of the scheme to manage, but the youngsters will be back to fill the age gap in a week's time. Jackie O'Brien reporting Scotland, Nairn.
Now let's see what we can expect from the weather as the weekend approaches. Please tell us no more rain.
No more rain, plenty of sunshine, reaching for the sunglasses at times probably, Sally, but
Sunshine does not mean warmth. Thank you very much indeed. Hello there. It's been pretty cloudy and damp across many parts of the country today, and little change really as we head through the course of this evening and overnight, with outbreaks of rain continuing, although turning fairly fragmented at times, so easing off, and dry in the southwest, a few dry slots elsewhere as well, and where the sky's clear, there will be a risk of ice as the temperature drops. Town and city temperatures just above freezing in the countryside, well below. So tomorrow it gets off to a cloudy start, still this persistent band of rain for central and southeastern areas, snow there on the hills, rain really for most. Something drier and brighter in the southwest and certainly for the northwest and northeast, some brighter moments, but through the central belt, this cloudy, wet zone of weather likely to be persistent and hanging around, not particularly heavy, but a nuisance nonetheless. Quite a cool afternoon, 3, 4, 5 Celsius, and certainly even where we have some sunshine, not particularly warm. Across the northeast, these showers wintry over the hills, and as we go through towards the evening, that snow just starting to fall to some lower levels. The wind's picking up as well, and that signals a change as we go in towards the weekend, with strengthening northerly winds introducing some cold, bitter cold Arctic air. But high pressure building, settling the weather down, so a lot of dry weather to come, a lot of sunny weather to come, but cold. So here is Saturday. Those strong northerly winds giving a real bitter feel. 1 or 2 isolated wintry flurries, but for most of us dry and bright. Temperatures barely above freezing. Add on the wind strength and it's going to feel below freezing at times and exposure to that wind, so bitter raw feel. Sunday, still quite a cool day, but a sunny day, and the wind's lighter, so not feeling quite as nippy. Perhaps a little more cloud in the far north and northwest. A few outbreaks of rain at times across the Northern Isles. To summarise this weekend, well, mostly dry, bitterly cold at times on Saturday, but despite the cold, some sunshine. That's the forecast. Sally.
Thanks very much, Chris. A reminder now of tonight's main news. Scotland's largest health board has apologised to patients who've faced lengthy waits for treatment at its hospital, accident and emergency departments over the festive period. NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde has had to cancel planned operations and use surgical beds for medical patients to cope with the high demand. The row between Donald Trump and his former top aide Steve Bannon has intensified, with lawyers for the president threatening legal action. It follows comments attributed to Mr Bannon in a book about the Trump presidency. The president said Mr Bannon, who was sacked last August, had lost his mind. And that's Reporting Scotland. I'll be back with the headlines at 8 and the late bulletin just after the 10 o'clock news. Until then, from everyone in the team right across the country, have a good evening. Bye-bye.